Hi everyone, Timothy Ferris here with a few words about creativity. And I'm going to define creativity for present purposes as making something that one is unique or at least highly original, something unpredictable, something that's not like what people have done before. And second, that is viewed in positive terms as making a contribution to human thought or society. Now, I realize this is a rather narrow definition and it excludes a lot of things. I don't mean to say that your child's finger painting isn't creative, but I want to talk about creativity in terms of its clearest aspects. That the work of a Beethoven or an Einstein is genuinely creative by these criteria. And I also recognize that the criteria mean that society makes the decision, and society can sometimes be wrong. One reason that Van Gogh is so popular as a painter is, of course, that he was a great creative talent, but also that he never managed to sell a painting in his life. So lots of folks who imagine themselves to be creative are drawn to examples like that, since, if you've written some books or made some films that people didn't care that much about, you can always think, well, maybe I'm like Van Gogh, and after I'm gone they'll realize how great this work was, and you might be right. But in this little discussion I'm going to stick to the clear cases of what everyone can pretty much agree in the present time frame is original, positive work. And I do want to stress that it is the wider society that makes the decision about what is creative. Insisting that oneself is a creative artist and that one's work is great creative work is of no use at all. It's like going around insisting that you're smart or that you're rich or that you're beautiful. Those aren't decisions that are up to you in the long run to make. Historically and broadly speaking, we could say that there are two views of creativity. The first has pertained for thousands of years and is embodied in many religious and philosophical systems, and that holds that human creativity is unique. In the world of traditional Christianity, for instance, and many other religions, God created the world pretty much as we find it. The birds and animals and the fish in the sea were created in a kind of static condition by God. The world was a sort of Eden, which is the old Arabic word meaning a garden. And then God set us humans down here separately. We had no relationship genetically, if that term had any meaning at the time, to the other animals. We weren't animals at all. We were unique creatures. And our creativity was unique. It didn't make sense to think of other animals as being creative. They were just in this static world. They just kept doing their thing. The second view of creativity has arisen more recently, really after the discovery of the mechanisms of biological evolution. Not only that evolution takes place, but how it works is established primarily in the works of Charles Darwin. This made it clear that nature could be extremely creative, that all the species of life we see around us satisfy the rules I suggested about creativity. They could not be predicted, and not in detail, and they're viewed as beneficial in that creatures multiply in a competitive environment as seen by evolution, to the extent that they're able to do better than the alternative versions of genetics in a given time and place, in a given environment. Nature manages all this creativity using nothing but replication and errors in the replication, which produce enough different individuals so that as environmental conditions change, what had been a variation that hadn't seemed to have any effect or even to have a negative effect may prove to encourage the perpetuation of a particular species or subspecies. It's important to note that in evolution, all that nature knows about is whether a particular genotype replicated, whether individuals survived long enough to and to put it in human terms, have children. That's all that evolution knows about. And yet, with that blind approach, it has produced levels of creativity that continue to inspire artists to this day. They're just astounding. You look at things like life in the depths of the ocean. They're unique, very, very difficult to predict such a thing. And they are beneficial in that these are species that are enduring, even though you're looking sometimes at fish that live in the depths of the sea have never even seen sunlight. And perhaps even human artistic creativity could be seen as an evolutionary phenomenon by these lights. In the older view of creativity, the creator was the artist, often inspired by God. And you could say that in that sense, like when George Friedrich Handel, came back from composing a piece and said, "I believe I've been inspired, that I was able to write so much in such a short time." I wonder sometimes whether that's the force of nature, Dylan Thomas's green fuse that drives the flower. That perhaps these creators were speaking of nature, being part of nature, but their term for it was God, that I was inspired by God to create this. And there certainly were many humble positions taken by artists to say, well, I was just a vehicle for this divine force. With the discovery of evolution and the newer picture of the world in which all of nature is creative, you could have that same feeling, but you would tend more to attribute it somehow to the natural world, so that when a songwriter as good as Bob Dylan says that, well, some of those songs at least seem to flow through me, and I didn't seem to have much to do with it. Creative people have often had that experience, that if you do enough work, you can feel that nature is just working through you, and perhaps your human work is just a part of nature's broader creativity. On the other hand, you can take an auteur view that what matters is the creative person, because without this particular creator, there would never be these works. Unless Stanley Kubrick were alive, no one would have made Stanley Kubrick's movies. Werner Heisenberg famously said that had I not existed, someone else would have discovered the uncertainty principle. But had Beethoven never existed, no one else would have written the Opus 111. So which is it? Is artistic creativity one's own work, or is it just an expression of nature? And to what degree is nature's creativity predetermined? It's true that in moments of inspiration, the artist may feel either way. They may feel that, gee, I did this, or I was just a vehicle for nature's doing this thing. It may well be that this question requires deciding what we think about free will. At present, free will is in eclipse. Most leading thinkers are of the opinion that there's no such thing as free will because of cause and effect, that the world is strictly deterministic. This leads to the idea that every word in, let's say, a work of Dostoevsky's was determined back at the time of the Big Bang. And Dostoevsky had no choice but to write those words. And it's true that when an artist is feeling inspired, perhaps the artist can say, oh, this was destined to be written this way. But in 90% of the time that one spends doing creative work, it really is difficult to imagine that that's the case. If you think about writing, which is what I have the most experience with, if you're on, say, the 12th draft of a book you've been working on for 10 years, and those are both real numbers in my case, and you have thrown away so much material and changed word after word, and it's taken you years just to figure out what direction this book wants to go and to help it get there. Sure, you could say that the wider workings of nature are part of it. After all, you're a biological creature. You come here through the workings of nature. It wouldn't be surprising that your writing was also somehow a product of nature. But it is very difficult to imagine that every one of those words that you spent all this sweat and tears determining, and there were alternatives that you threw out all the way along, that all of that was somehow determined billions of years ago, and that you're just operating as a kind of automaton. It's difficult not to come to that conclusion, however, if you start with physics at its current state, because physics at its current state is initial conditions plus the known laws of physics, which are not all the laws of nature, but just the ones that we know so far. It may well be, and I expect will be, that there's a lot more to be learned about nature, and about physics. And that perhaps free will turn out to be a thing after all. Maybe what's important is the way entities compute in the here and now. And the human brain does compute. In fact, I would say that every natural entity has to compute to some degree just to persist, just to exist. So personally, I'm of the opinion that free will is real, but it's only an opinion. I can't prove it yet because physics can't prove it yet. We'll just have to wait and see what happens and who comes up with what, and that too will be a creative act. Hey, thanks for listening. See you next time.